And it's now time for KTN News Center. Good morning once again and welcome to the program. Now, as climate change fuels more extreme weather events and environmental disasters threaten wildlife and human health, experts say that people should bank on clean carbon energy to speed the world's transition away from the fossil fuels and slow the global warming. Dr. Xavier Francis, energy expert, will be taking us through the alternative energy sources to speed the transition. My name is Purity Museo Nzuki. Let's get started. Right, and we get straight to a conversation where with the world attempting to reach net zero by the middle of this century, what sources of energy could feasibly replace fossil fuel? And to help us unpack all this, once again, Dr. Francis Xavier. He is the head of energy at the Institute of Energy and Environmental Technology at the JQAT. Thank you so much for making time for us. Yes, you know, over the weekend, was it on Friday, there was power blackout, and Kenyans, as usual on Twitter, were blaming this on the monopoly on electricity that we have here in the country. And so we're not just going to talk about sources of energy, but clean energy that experts are saying it's a game changer in really addressing climate change. So let's begin by a comment on what happened over the weekend. How did we find ourselves there? Because there was even a problem at the JKIA where, you know, you saw the conversation that there was power failure as well, and a lot of economic sabotage occurred over the weekend. As a country that is at the front line, and the government says it's at the front line in ensuring that there is clean energy transition, how did we find ourselves there, really?
Well, it's a situation that on one hand, there's a lack of capacity, and then on the other hand, there's a lack of storage. So on the part of capacity, you find that certain events can be predicted. Certain events can actually be shown and can be modeled. For instance, like if you have a solar system or a wind power plant, and you are doing proper prediction of the weather, proper prediction of the expected wind speeds or expected sunshine in the next couple of days, then you can be able to predict to a certain level of certainty that in the next 1 hour or in the next 12 hours, we are going to have a reduction in the amount of solar irradiance or in the wind speed, and this one will affect how much we are putting into the grid. So that's one aspect of it. Also, in terms of grid modeling, you have to be able to have to model a situation in the event a particular power plant falls off. How do we manage the whole grid system? So for that part, you find there's a whole problem about capacity, that there is not sufficient competency within the country to be able to address such kind of questions. And at the Institute of Energy of JQuat, we have revamped our program, and we are starting to consider this kind of issues, emerging issues for a country like Kenya. Then on the other side, we have a situation of that we are blessed as a country with alternative energy. Yeah. We have wind, we have solar, we have hydro, we have geothermal, we have a lot of biomass, and all these are working very well. But then the point is, how do we leverage on them? Because there is a challenge that if you have like more than 60 or 70% of your whole energy mix based on variable renewable energy like wind and solar, it means any fluctuation in these sources will directly impact on the amount of energy or electricity in the grid. Yeah. So this aspect then has to be considered, and you have to have what you call storage. Yeah. That's why it comes in the story of the storage. That we find, like for us as a country, we do not have large-scale battery storage or large-scale storage facilities, such that if there is a fall in electricity generation, we are able to bank on the storage to fill in the gap on a short-term basis. So that kind of situation also is a problem of planning and a problem of understanding what do we have as a country.
Yeah, and we have experts like you. When you talk about problem of planning and understanding and storage, I mean, why do we have that problem with experts, great experts in the country? Talking of storage, what will it really take for a country to have enough? Because we're not talking about Kenya only. We've seen other African countries struggling with power. We're talking about Nigeria always experiencing power blackouts. I mean, is it too hard to handle?
No, it is a problem of, as I said again, competencies.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a question of competency, building the critical mass of experts who can be able to address these issues in the way it's supposed to be addressed. For instance, within Kenya, we have trained a lot of engineers, electrical, civil, mechanical, mechatronics. They are all there, yeah? But then, in terms of training renewable energy experts, that is lacking.
So we don't have enough renewable.
We do not have that critical mass of properly trained renewable energy experts.
We have institutions like JKUAT.
Right, we do have an institution like JKUAT, and at JKUAT we are trying our very best.
Yeah.
For instance, at JKUAT we have now been able to get like scholarships for our master students for the next 3 years. And anyone who is interested can apply. The next intake is happening in October. You can apply. We have been able to get support from the UK government, UK aid, in terms of transforming energy access learning platform, where we have now been able to reorganize and revamp our curriculum, modernize our energy curriculum. But then these are very small. It's very small, a small drop in the what is supposed to happen. And that, unfortunately, is the reality on the ground. And the government itself has not prioritized capacity building within the renewable energy sector. So in terms of giving out research funds, giving out scholarships, for instance, particularly targeted to renewable energy sector.
Yeah.
So it's only those people who have money who can now be able to do what? To actually attend these courses.
Yeah, that's right. And let's talk about what step by step. I know you've talked about training, but there's also the question of the storage. Step by step, what should countries do to ensure that there's no repeat of what probably we saw on Friday? Yeah.
Basically, you're looking at a 5-prong approach, a 5-step approach. Number one, you have to understand what resources do we have. So that means what we call resource mapping. So, for instance, in Kenya, the solar has been mapped, but the wind map in Kenya is not very good.
Yeah. To
be polite, it's not very good. If you compare that with the one that was done for Ethiopia, Ethiopia's has a very, very detailed wind resource map. One that if you look at it, you can actually know, okay, I can actually install my wind turbine in such and such a place.
Yeah.
So for Kenya, we don't have that kind of detailed wind resource map. Hydro, there was work done on small hydros. There are maps on that. Biomass, there was work done under PICES project to a large extent, but then also REREC itself is now engaging with JKUAT. At the Institute, we are trying to engage with REREC to be able to consider the concept of looking at more detailed, specific renewable biomass-based sources. And then geothermal is more or less fully mapped.
Yeah.
And when all this can now be put together, we'll have the first step, the resources. Then the second thing is now the training of people, because you need to know if we have these resources, then we can train this kind of people. And that, as I've mentioned before, has not been happening. Then the third aspect is also now the R&D, because it is not fair, it is not right to be fully dependent on outside countries to import technology. Because when you import technology, you just become a technology consumer, you can never develop.
Yeah.
Because the agenda of what kind of technology will work under your environment can never be furthered beyond what their owner has given you.
Yeah.
So that is also some other aspect. And then the fourth one, and which is actually the most critical aspect, is now where we now bring all these aspects together. For instance, like you see when you're talking about the climate summit that is going to happen from the 4th to the 6th.
Yeah.
That one is bringing people together to have a common agenda, and discuss things like doubling energy efficiency, doubling energy technologies, and then tripling the renewable energy mix. And you see, that is an agenda you bring on the table and people discuss it. So you have to bring all this together and make a very clear line on how we go about. And then the last one is the economics.
Yeah.
Right now, to this year, you can import solar panels with no taxes. But then you are not sure what will happen next year because the government keeps changing this kind of situation. So if you had a clear plan that for the next 10 years, you will not have to pay taxes on solar panels, you are sure about that, and the government
will go down.
Yeah, so then everyone will be able to now actually invest in that. But the changing in taxation, the changing in duty, kind of affects someone so that one is never sure, should I invest or not? You get, and that's the kind of scenario. So resources, competence, then having a clear plan, and then finally the economics of it. So when all this join together, then you can move.
Yeah, and the electricity that we utilize as a country, is it even free from fossil fuel?
Well, when you look at the energy mix in Kenya, some portion of it comes from hydro, some portion from wind, some portion from solar, some portion from geothermal, but then there's a portion that comes from thermal generated power, so fossil. So generally the energy mix in Kenya is not 100% renewable. It has some renewable, it has some thermal power sources in terms of heavy diesel that is used to generate electricity. And that one has partly affected the cost of electricity. But that is not a problem actually unique in Kenya.
It's not.
Many other countries across the world have this kind of mix in terms of thermal, in terms of also nuclear. So it is not a uniquely Kenyan problem. But Kenya has an opportunity to completely do away with the thermal. That is the biggest advantage we have, right?
Yeah, and you know the question would be, why are countries really not committed to honoring the commitments again they entered? We saw even last year during COP27, the conversation was on fossil fuels and countries committing to reducing use of it. So what is exactly the problem that even the greatest and the biggest emitters of fossil fuel, they do not want to completely leave this behavior? And they all do understand, the politicians, the experts, and even me as a journalist, I know that emission of fossil fuel really affects the global warming, and it's the main cause of what we're experiencing with our climate, but there's no commitment. There are commitments, but no country wants to fully honor this. What is really there with fossil fuels that countries do not want to completely abandon use of it?
Well, that's a highly charged political question. It's political in a big sense because, for instance, you find most of the fossil fuels are denominated in dollar.
Yeah.
They're not denominated in Kenya shillings or in euros, but in dollars. Yeah, so you find dollars per barrel of oil. So the moment you want to stop talking about the fossil fuels, you are basically affecting the dollar economies. Yeah, that's the first thing, political in that sense. Then secondly, if all the world was to move to renewables, what would happen to Saudi Arabia? That's another question. Then you come more practically to the home, like in Kenya. Generally, the upfront cost for renewables, the installation, is normally much higher than the upfront cost for installing like a diesel generator. You get? So for the same installation in terms of watts or megawatts, if you have a diesel generator and you have a wind park, you find that the diesel will tend to have a slightly lower installation cost. And that one is something that is even affecting households in Kenya today. Like for you, if you want to transition from KPLC to renewables, you'll find that the initial cost will be like you need around 300,000. But if you needed electricity which has some thermal component from KPLC, they'll tell you maybe you pay 42,000 or 100,000. So the upfront cost is also challenging. So those aspects basically make it very difficult for one to totally remove thermal from the energy mix. However, people can do
possible.
it. It's possible.
Exactly.
It's possible.
Yeah.
I think, was it Norway or Finland? About 3 months back, the electricity prices went to negative. You see, it's a country that is fully running on hydro.
Yeah.
They had so much water, they had so much electricity, the supply outstripped the demand. So now they were actually giving people now, in quotes, electricity for free.
Yeah.
Because it's either you don't produce, which will affect you, or you produce, but now because you're producing too much, you actually encourage people to use it by not paying. So the price of electricity actually went to negative. So that is a possibility within us.
Yeah, and I think it's a lack of commitment and support. For example, when you say if we all run away from fossil fuels, then what will happen to Saudi Arabia? I think it's the question of, again, support and goodwill from governments across the world. And this brings us to the question, then why do we have the global meetings then if there's no commitment that, you know what, the countries that are struggling, that do not have these alternative energy sources, then they can get support from the countries that enjoy all these forms of support or energy systems. Yeah.
That is a question I think also the president himself, Dr. President Ruto, has addressed in various forums, because he has mentioned that how long will we continue to depend on Western people to drive our own domestic agenda? And I think it comes to a point where the government and the people of each particular country has to make that very conscious decision to make that transition. But if you're going to depend on maybe America or Europe to force you or push you into that transition, you will fail because they have their own agenda. Right now, just as a quick thought about it, right now Europe is moving towards hydrogen. And they are funding studies, and they have actually, there's part of this summit that is happening in the next few days, the climate summit, that one of the biggest discussion will be on hydrogen, doubling hydrogen generation. And Kenya is part of 6 nation countries in Africa that are under the African Hydrogen Alliance that are going to be actually like pilot projects, which we are going to try to use renewables to generate hydrogen and some sort of export it to Europe. Because Europe wants to move away from natural gas. A huge percentage of natural gas was coming from Russia. But now with the Russia-Ukraine war, their supply was affected. Europe's supply was affected. So now they want to transition to another energy source, which is hydrogen. And that one shows you that once people can come together and agree, let's transition, then it is possible to do it.
And as governments, most of the conversations that were ongoing, there was at some point where the US even said that we do not want to be part of this conversation where we have to stop use of fossil fuel because it's going to affect our economy. And as a president, I mean, you don't want your people to struggle economically. You want to ensure that that is not affected, because you know what the citizens will do. So as an expert, as a climate expert, how would you advocate or say that countries can really transition successfully without or just partly affecting the economy? And if it will be affected, because definitely it will, how can they, is there hope that yes, your economy might go down at some point, but there is hope that it will even do better with the transition?
Okay, with the particular focus on Africa, and specifically looking at Kenya, the biggest challenge is understanding what kind of resources you have. So if, like for Kenya, we have an abundance of renewable energy resources. So for us, transitioning to renewables is easier, and it will not really like affect the country in a big way. But then if you have a country which one of the benchmark, the foundation is actually fossil fuel, Nigeria, they have a huge amount of fossil fuel. Ghana, they have a huge amount of fossil fuel. Now you want to tell them, okay, you know what, you guys can exploit this, send it out to other people, but within your own country, you don't use that fossil fuel. It becomes a challenge.
Yeah.
And it is because of that aspect of the economic aspect, the kind of what you sell out, what you export. If one of your major exports is oil, then it becomes like a double-edged sword, because you cannot be able to properly exploit oil for others to use and pollute the world with, while you yourself, you are driving a renewable energy agenda. Right. It becomes quite a challenge. But for those countries which have the opportunity to transition to renewables, because they have renewables in abundance, Somalia, Ethiopia, Congo, you get, then for you it's a big opportunity to transition without necessarily relying on the oil. And well, can a country run completely without fossils?
Yes.
The answer is yes, but it will require changes. For instance, if Kenya was to decide to run completely on fossil fuel, one of the biggest challenges will be those second-hand cars we drive.
Yeah.
will have to stop coming in.
Yes.
So it will mean people will have to buy the more expensive electric vehicles.
Yeah. But
it is possible. There might be certain pains, there might be certain needs to change, but it is possible to transition.
And this actually reminds me of when the president lifted the ban on logging in the country, but then takes us back to why the ban was even imposed in the first place, because there was a lot of deforestation happening, and quote-unquote Kenyans were not disciplined enough to ensure that they do proper cutting of the trees that are, you know, of essence. But now with the introduction of this, we've had a divided opinion, because we're talking of charcoal users are happy about this because that's how they make their livelihood, but then some experts saying, no, this is a wrong idea. So when you're making these decisions as a government, what are some of the factors that need to be considered so that we have the timber industry that was all in celebrations after the president really lifted the ban? Yeah.
Well, what are some of these factors?
Yeah.
One of the things is, before you can make a decision, particularly when it comes to energy, before you make a decision that we need to leave this particular source of energy, you must already have put in place the alternative.
Yeah.
For example, a couple of years back, some of the counties on the eastern side of Kenya, Makueni, Machakos and stuff, they put a total ban on charcoal. But then the question comes, okay, so those households that have been relying on charcoal, what alternative have you put in place for them?
Right.
So before you make such kind of decisions, the alternative must already be in the market at a price that is almost equivalent to what was there, if not lower, and also providing the same quality of service that the previous energy source was providing.
Right.
So making such a decision requires that already the alternative is already entrenched. You get, so like if you have decided that I don't want people to be wearing leather jeans, for example, then you should already have an alternative that's already in the market. By the time you say we are banning leather jeans, then already the market must already have an alternative that is working for people. But to make a distinction and say, okay, we are breaking, we are no more, we are lifting the ban on forest logging. What alternative is there in terms of what informed that decision to raise the logging? For example, that is something that should be thought. What informed that decision? Was it that there were less charcoal, or was it that people are importing timber or
actually
beds?
That's one of the reasons that the president highlighted, that we don't have to import timber when we can, you know, manufacture our own right here.
So if the question was that the issue was we needed, the logging had to be lifted because we are spending so much money on importing timber for beds, then the question should have been, is there an alternative apart from just timber for beds? Is there plastic beds, metal beds? Can they be brought to a price which is cheaper to a normal wooden bed? So these are some of the issues that sometimes when we make decisions, we do not consider what is called the alternative. And if the alternative has not been considered, then you find you create a loop in the market which leads to exploitation. So for example, now you say we are lifting the ban for logging we have lifted the ban. So most people will go into the forest, not because they want to get timber for beds, but probably because they want to get cheaper charcoal, cheaper
and
fuel.
Firewood. Yeah.
And so it comes to a point where it plays back the opposite direction.
Yeah.
You actually now start retrogressing. That's the way I would put it.
All right, and despite all these concerns that we have as a country, Kenya is still going to host the African Climate Summit. Is it doing better than other countries? We shall explore that and much more when you return from this quick breather. Stay with us.
Thank you.